recording. All right, welcome again, everybody, to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Alicia King, and I am the volunteer host for the Bird Book Club, which we hold monthly. And we are so glad that you're here. And I love seeing all the repeat offenders. You guys are reading the books. That's great. So let me share my screen. I'm always tentative. It looks like Zoom kind of did an update here. So let's see if I can get my computer to work properly. All right, there we go. And I just need a nod from Elise that they can see my slides. Excellent. So again, welcome everybody to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. I just want to give you a quick overview of Environment for the Americas. I see a lot of familiar faces, so you guys have heard this before. But we do at Environment for the Americas protect, connect, and inspire. And that's incredibly crucial for us because we are committed to connecting people to nature and bird conservation. The more that we can really focus on birds and connecting people to those birds, the better jobs we can do with bird conservation. So we do lead local or global partnerships and local partnerships, focus on bird conservation, and the aim is to protect migratory bird species and their habitats across international borders. Our program really does nurture the next generation of conservationists, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we do education, outreach, and create meaningful career opportunities. Our organization is the home for World Migratory Bird Day. It's been going on for a long time. Back in the old days, it was called International Migratory Bird Day, but it really is the cornerstone conservation campaign that's central to so many of our programs at Environment for the Americas. We really want to raise raise the awareness and highlight initiatives needed for conservation of migratory birds and their habitats. This global reach allows us, hopefully, to conserve both birds and their environments through our education, our public engagement, and our joint activities across the borders. So one of the things that we do is every year we have a different theme for World Migratory Bird Day. This theme has come across by people getting together and talking about what are some of the important things we need to be thinking about this year. So we'll continue with the 2026 theme, which is Every Bird Counts, Your Observations Matter. And then in 2027, we'll have a different theme that we'll announce at the beginning of the year. And really, this theme for this year, the highlight is that your observations do matter, and the work that you do in your communities and the people that you engage with, knowing what we're observing and what we're seeing in the bird world is important to the conservation actions that we may need to take. And I mentioned the next generation. And one of the ways that we engage in the next generation is through our internship programs. So we want to empower underrepresented, in particular, early career professionals. We do this with a variety of partners, a lot of federal agencies, state agencies, birding clubs and organizations, natural resource agencies, and we offer the hands-on experience and mentorship so that hopefully we're equipping the next generation of conservationists with the skills and the things that they need to really think about stewardship and their own conservation careers. So there are many ways that you all can be involved. And thank you for all of you that continue to come to the Bird Book Club and continue to support the great work that we do. And there are many ways that you all are involved and that other people can become involved. And one way is to become a member. You can simply go to our website and join. And then you can donate a Happy Kit. So this Happy Kit is what we send to educators in Latin America. And it has a lot of conservation education resources that many of the people in Central and South America might not otherwise be able to get their hands on. We also work to get them binoculars. So you can donate toward purchasing binoculars. Sometimes they're used, sometimes they're new. We work with a variety of partners. Vortex is one of our partners that to allow us to get binoculars to take to these countries. It really makes a huge difference when we're trying to engage the communities in bird conservation work. You can also donate airline miles to send interns around the country. And then if you're going on a trip, you could take stuff with you. So education supplies, you can get an extra suitcase, leave the suitcase down there or empty it and fill it up with cool, fun stuff when you come back. But helping us deliver education supplies can be very important. And then, of course, there's shopping online. And who doesn't like to go shopping? Well, I'm not a big shopper, but I do like it when I know that what I'm purchasing makes a difference. And I want to point out my earrings. I have hummingbird earrings on, and I want you to notice they're different. They're sold as a set, but they're different because as we think about the way we observe birds, it is a conversation starter. So we can talk to people about where we got the earrings and what it means to help hummingbirds or other birds survive in the environment that they need to survive in. So shopping our online store is one great way that you can support us and support vendors and businesses that do things that are environmentally friendly. These earrings are made out of old cereal boxes. So the paper is rolled out and then it's branded with a cutout, and then they're painted. And so I just love these, and I love talking to people about them, obviously. So again, thanks for joining the Bird Book Club, and continue to put those, what have you been observing bird-wise? Our Bird Book Club is the second Thursday of each month. We try to keep it consistent. You can register for all or some of them. The QR code is real easy to get in and register for the rest of the ones that are here on our website. And we are in the process of confirming additional Bird Book Clubs for 2027. And I'm happy to say that Scott Weidensaul is going to be our author in the month of January. But tonight, I am so excited. We have Merilyn Simonds, who has written this fabulous book of the story of a woman who lived in Canada, did a lot of cool things. I'm not going to say everything about her because I know that Merilyn is gonna tell us more. But Merilyn, at a young age, published her first book. She was 29, and she has been published internationally in 8 different countries. She writes a variety of really cool books, and I already started on my next one, which is the Walking with Beth. And her ability to tell a story about, in particular, in this book, Woman Watching, has been extraordinary, especially because of the connection that that Merilyn makes with the observations and the work that was done and the meat of this book. So I'm very excited to be able to introduce you to Merilyn, and I'm gonna hope I can get out of this. It's thank you. Thank you, Elise. So welcome, Merilyn. Welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. How are you this
Well,
evening?
thank you so much. I really applaud the work of Environment for the Americas. I do work with the Pelee Island Bird Observatory, and we have something we call the Prismaticos Project, where we collect used binoculars and take them to Mexico, to rural communities, to schools, and to conservationists. And it sounds like PIBO's work and Environment for the Americas is very well matched, and it's so needed. I mean, we get so used to being able to buy binoculars, etc. But and certainly where we live in Mexico, binoculars cost a fortune, and most schools don't have them, and most people don't have them. So yeah, it's great to be in this room full of birders. I've been watching all the birds that you've been seeing. Lots of Cooper's hawks in there. That's very interesting. I can't see you all, but I know you're there. And I hope you'll ask me lots of questions. It's my favorite part of an event like this. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Louise de Kiriline Lawrence, who is an absolutely remarkable self-trained ornithologist. Um, I suspect, like most of us. She lived and worked in the northern Ontario bush in the second half of the last century. She was a woman of many lives, and she eventually turned her back on all of them to devote herself exclusively to birds for 50 years. And in the process, she became a significant amateur naturalist and nature writer, and a person that is called Canada's Rachel Carson, and you'll find out why. So if you just bear with me for a moment, I'm going to share my screen, and so that I can show you some photographs of Louise. Okay, I hope you all can see that. Yeah? Okay, excellent. All right. I gotta just move things around. Oh, there we go. Um, yeah, so Louise grew up with birds. The family lore is that her first words were not mama and papa, but craw, craw, the sound of the hooded crows that would fly over her carriage. She was born into great privilege, as you might be able to tell from the photographs. Her father was Chamberlain to the court of King Gustav V of Sweden. Her godmother was the Queen of Denmark. Her best friend became the Queen of Norway. She spent her first 17 years on a huge family estate on the Baltic Sea. Her father, which is on the right-hand side there, I hope our directions are the same, me and you. Her father was a noted conservationist, and with his friends, he started the world's second conservation area. The first is Yellowstone. The second was on Karlsö Island in the Baltic Sea, where he and his friends bought up all the land in order to save the razorbill auk from extinction through egg collecting and poaching. So, as the eldest of two daughters, Louise expected to inherit the estate, but her father died suddenly and the estate had to be sold for debts. So, when the First World War broke out, she turned her back on that first life and trained as a Red Cross nurse. She was posted to a Russian prisoner of war camp near the border of Denmark, where she fell in love with the very handsome Gleb Kiriline Nikolaevich, and that's a picture on the right of Gleb and Louise. He was an officer in the White Russian Army. They married, and she followed him to Archangel, which you should look up. It's a city just inside the Arctic Circle, and that's where the White Russians were taking a last stand against the Red Russians, the Bolsheviks. And the Whites were defeated, and Gleb and Louise joined 1,000 sleigh loads of refugees and soldiers that raced west in the middle of January through blizzards, trying to get to the Finnish border, and which meant freedom. But instead, they were captured and they were sent to a Bolshevik prison in Moscow, and there Gleb disappeared. Louise was released. So Gleb and Louise had planned to emigrate to Canada, and so after 4 years of looking for her husband and not finding him, Louise decided to emigrate herself. She was hired by the Canadian Red Cross to set up a Red Cross outpost hospital. That's in the middle, Louise standing in front of her Red Cross hospital. This was a really unique experiment in medical care in Canada. The community would provide a house, and the Red Cross would provide a nurse and supplies. Louise provided healthcare to families scattered over a 2,500 square kilometer area. So it's a huge area. She visited all her families in summer in her Model T Ford, which is on the upper left. It was called Henrietta. And in winter by dog sled. She trained the dogs herself and learned to mush. So this gives you some idea of the kind of strength and resilience and resourcefulness that this woman had. In the spring of 1934, one of Louise's mothers, Elzire Dion, gave birth to the world's first quintuplets to survive more than a day. Louise was on the spot as they were being born in a little log house without hydro or without electricity, running water, etc. She developed a kind of a homemade incubator in the wood stove. She brought these babies successfully through their first year. And in fact, the last of the Dion quintuplets just died last Christmas. So they lived long, although somewhat difficult lives, because there was an incredible media circus around these quintuplets. Some 3,000 people would line up every day to walk past the observation windows that looked onto the playground where these five little girls were playing. The media circus was too much for Louise, and so she bought a piece of wilderness on Pimisi Bay, which is a bulge in the Mattawa River just north of Algonquin Park. This, I hope you can understand this map. It's not the best, but you can see that this shows the border between Ontario, Canada, and New York State. On the far right is the Adirondack Mountains. And if you kind of go up to the upper left, you'll see the Algonquin Highlands, and that's where Algonquin Park is. Go right up to the top left, and that's the town of Mattawa. It's on the convergence of the Ottawa River and the Mattawa River. So she bought a piece of wilderness there. That's Louise in 1935. She built a little log cabin on the shore of Pimisi Bay that she called her loghouse nest. And her intention was to move into this 3-room cabin and write a book about the quintuplets, which in fact she ended up doing. So this is a slightly better map. That's a photograph of her cabin in winter. You can see the winters were rather extreme. She had 3 acres that bounded on Crown land on 3 sides. And on the left there is the map, and it I don't think you can you see my cursor? Yes? Okay, good. So the Ottawa River comes up and it joins the Mattawa, and you can see this big arrow here. That's Pimisi Bay, which is really it's not really a bay. It's kind of a bulge that looks like a lake, a bulge in the Mattawa River. And she was just on the left side of that. So Louise had happened onto a very privileged location where she built her cabin. So the Mattawa River represents the southern limit of northern breeding birds, where it overlaps with the northern limit of southern breeding birds. So it's especially rich in avian life. However, none of the birds she saw were familiar to her from Sweden. She had a hired man named Len, and he taught her the names of some of the common northern species like chickadees and woodpicks, which was the common name for woodpeckers, and whiskey jacks, which was the common name for gray jays, or as we like to call them, Canada jays. But those, the migrating birds, the brightly colored warblers, etc., they were a mystery to her. She had to learn her birds from books, solely from books. And, that's really, most of us don't have to do that in this day and age. And so the book she's reading on the left there is Percy Taverner's Birds of Canada, which came out in 1934, right at that same time that she moved into the woods, and was the first book to list all Canadian species. It was too big, of course, to carry into the woods, so she also had pocket guides, the Chester A. Reed and Frank Chapman bird guides. So these 3 were her Bibles. I personally, that's my pocket bird guide. I have the 1912 Chapman. So she would take these out into the woods, dressed as Chapman advised, draped in ferns as camouflage, and she would also pin a cushion to the bottom of her coat so that she could walk through the woods. And if she wanted to sit and observe something, she could flip the cushion under her bum and sit on a stump or a snowbank or wherever and watch for hours, which of course is what she did, learning to identify species, but also observing very closely the behavior of birds, which really were her only companions out there. So Louise was very curious and persistent. She wanted to know everything. Training as a nurse, she had a somewhat scientific background, and that served her in good stead. She turned to experts like Percy Taverner, that's him in the middle, the long, tall drink of water guy. She wrote him dozens of letters about her sightings and peppering him with questions, and he actually was the one who set standards for writing about birds and encouraged her to be observant rather than solely emotional. The first time she saw a cardinal, which was rare in Northern Ontario at that time, not now, she called it she called it a piece of red flannel, and she didn't know the name. She developed friendships with bird scientists around the world. Her closest friend was Margaret Morse Nice. That's the woman at the bottom left, and she's the doyenne of American bird study. And also Amelia Lasky on the upper left, and especially Alexander Scutch, who was very similar to Louise in that he set up a compound in the middle of the jungle in Costa Rica and spent his entire life studying birds. It's well worth a trip to his compound, which is now open to the public. These birders introduced her to other birders, and her correspondence grew to thousands of letters. And those letters were the basis for this book, which she exchanged with all the great professional and amateur ornithologists of the day in North America and Europe. These people, especially Taverner, encouraged her to start a daily bird record, a practice that she continued for 40 years. She kept meticulous notes, which are now stored in Library and Archives Canada. The number of birds she counted on her little 3-acre patch of forest is, well, it fills me with envy. 55 chimney swifts, 26 veeries, 33 red-eyed vireos, 75 American pipits. This is in one day. She also kept an astonishing number of nests under observation. And by that, I mean she went to the nests every day. She spent, 6 to 8 hours a day watching a nest. In the 1946 breeding season, she made notes on 62 different nests. But she wasn't satisfied with just watching and observing. Why not take up banding, Taverner said. I don't think anyone can really know a bird until they've had it in hand. And so for 17 years, Louise operated the most northerly banding station in Ontario. That's 1942 to 1959. She built all the traps herself. She was very resourceful. And I'm fairly certain that hers was the most northerly and probably one of the few banding stations operated by a woman. She decided during her work banding that what was lacking was a well-conducted regional study over many years. So one spot over many years. And with that in mind, she mapped her property and she began intensive studies into the behavior of birds. And it's hard for us to realize that so little was known about birds at that time. Nothing was known about red crossbills. Nothing was known about gray jays. They had not been observed at all. So one of the studies that she's very famous for is a dawn to dusk birdsong count of the red-eyed vireo. And if you're used to red-eyed vireos, you know that they, especially in the spring during nesting and mating, they just sing nonstop. And so she decided she would count, like how many songs are they singing? Started at dawn about 3:30 in the morning and counted for 14 hours. And turned out that what she recorded was a record of 22,197 songs. Um, she had somebody spell her off for the odd moment when she had to pee. Otherwise, she was counting for 14 hours. She also did a landmark nesting study that recorded the unique calls and songs of red-eyed vireos. And she was the one who noted for the first time that within their territory, the territory of a mating pair, there were two distinct areas, a nesting area and for the female and a singing area for the male. And if you've listened to red-eyed vireos, you know the male sings, 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 and then will suddenly stop. And that stop isn't just, him getting tired. It's a signal for the female to leave the nest and come into his singing area where he feeds her, which, good for her, I say. Um, but the study that propelled her to ornithological fame originally was a nest watch of Canada jays, the first ever of these birds. The Canada jays are remarkable because they lay their eggs in March in the boreal wilderness. They're very shy. They're very gregarious in the summer, but when they're mating, they're very shy. And almost no one had been able to find a nest. Well, she found a nest about 4 miles into the woods from where she was. And she watched it over a period of a week, every day, like for 7 to 8 hours a day. And what she discovered was, yeah, I mean, people, how could they incubate eggs at a time when there was 3 feet of snow on the ground and it was, sometimes as low as -30? Well, what she discovered is that the two birds both sit on the nest crosswise, kind of like a double duvet. Um, so that was uh, an amazing observation and has since contributed a lot to our understanding of gray jays. Um, but one of her most significant contributions was a 13-year study of the decline of warblers in her woods. So through the entire 1940s and into the first couple of years of the 1950s. She did a study, and I can tell you more about it if you want later, um, that decisively linked the decline of warblers to roadside spraying of chemicals. In her woods, the chestnut sided and the Canada warblers pictured there declined by 75% in that decade. And as you know, that decline has just continued on. But she published a paper on roadside spraying of chemicals causing that decline a dozen years before Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. Altogether, she published almost 100 articles in popular and scientific journals, including Audubon. At the time, she was the most frequent contributor to Audubon. To earn extra money, because she might have been raised in wealth, she lived in complete poverty. There was almost, scientists didn't make any money. She didn't make any money for her studies. She did it for, the good of the world. But to earn extra money, she taught herself to draw and she illustrated her own articles. So these, I'm showing you some of her drawings here, as well as on the upper right and left corners. These are nests and birds that she collected, the birds she collected along the road flown into car windshields and that sort of thing. And they're now in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada. She also wrote 6 books. Her second book, The Lovely and the Wild, which is on the far left there, it was awarded the John Burroughs Medal. It was the highest English language prize for nature writing. She won it the year after Rachel Carson. She was the first Canadian woman to receive the prize. And many of her conclusions about birds are now being proved true. She believed that birdsong is language, which, there are many acoustic ornithologists who are finding, amazing findings about bird language. And also that chickadees remember where they've hoarded seed in the forest and they retrieve it in the order that they hoarded it. Some of her key studies are still foundational. In particular, she did a comparative study on 4 species of woodpeckers, and that's still cited in Cornell's All About Birds website. So Louise continued her daily dawn bird walk well into her 90s. That's her there at, I believe it was 92. She kept notes on the arrival and departure dates, nesting, migration, all the bird behaviors that fascinated her. Her mantra was, because you see a bird, you do not know it. Her goal was to know birds as they are, to peel away human assumptions, our own need to use birds to our purposes, but rather to know them as a distinct species, to understand how they live in the world, and perhaps thus live better ourselves. She felt that, in particular, and I can talk about this later, that the way birds deal with aggression, humans could learn a great deal about that. Enough said. I met Louise when she was 40. Sorry, I was 40. I was a child, and Louise was 80. I wrote a profile of her for Harrowsmith magazine, and in, I think, 1989, and she asked me to be her biographer at that point. She died shortly after in 1992. And when she asked me to be her biographer, I said, oh, sure, which is kind of how I've gone through life. But I couldn't figure out how to write her story, which was complex, and I don't really like biographies. And I wanted the reader to know her the way I had, which is through her own voice. And luckily, she had left 26 bankers' boxes of letters and speeches and scrapbooks at Library and Archives Canada. I also researched our archives all across the continent to read the letters, the correspondences she had with Margaret Morris Nice and Amelia Lasky and all of these other amateur and professional ornithologists. But more than anything, I wanted to share with the reader the process of researching her life and the ethical dilemmas of telling the life history of someone I knew only at the end of her life. It wasn't until I started living half the year in Mexico, which I do now, and I live in the wintering grounds of some of the songbirds that nest in the north. In Mexico, they consider them their birds, and we consider them our birds in the north, which I find really funny. But I became intensely aware of bird migration and what it means to the birds, what it meant to Louise, who migrated from Sweden to Russia to Canada and back again. And sometime about 15 years ago, I felt I could see my way through to writing the life of this remarkable woman, using stories that I found in her letters and speeches and research studies, told in her own words, and making the entire process of the research and the telling visible from beginning to end. And where the story ends is with me living in Louise's loghouse nest. That's the picture on the left is as the house looks today. In the middle, that's the Mattawa River, where she canoed every day, and so did I. And on the right is my manuscript laid out in front of the fire. It was late September when I was there, trying to find the right structure for this book and her remarkable life. And I walked all the paths she made, which are still there, lined with stones, noting the birds that passed through. I had her list of last arrival dates for the birds, noting the birds that came and those that never came, all that was the same and all that had changed, which I think is where we are when we look at birds. We see the past, the present, and the future together. So I'm going to rejoin Alicia now. Hi.
Thank you so much for that overview. And oh my gosh, in my usual style, I have questions, but you all out there joining us for the Bird Book Club, please put your questions in the chat. Happy to have you come on and ask your questions or share your questions with the rest of us. But while you all are getting your questions in order or writing them down in the chat or whatever you want to do, I just want to ask you a few questions about things. wow, what a story in this book to begin with. And I can see why you would have to think about, okay, how do I put this together? But
Yeah.
one of the things that I wanted to add, and you do go into her nursing time and with the babies, and that
Hmm.
was fascinating. Um, and I was particularly intrigued by the incubators that, normally would be for one child, but there were five.
There
And then
were.
right away, my thought was, well, did she have one for birds and she had to make it bigger for the babies?
No, these were all her inventions, just some way to keep that many babies warm, and keep them fed. And one of the things she did was that she being a Swede, she believed that the baby should be outside every day. And so for 40 minutes every day they were put when it was minus 40. Um, so she believed in soap, sunshine, and fresh air.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? That comes through in your writing. Just her, this is the way it needs to be. And it's
Yeah,
healthier
yeah.
than not. And so I certainly appreciated that. But I have a couple questions for you. So it's so cool that you were able to meet her in person before she actually passed away. And I have a question about the bird stuff that she took notes of. But first, I want to ask you, in one of the chapters, called Never a Day Alike to the Other. You guys have to read this chapter. I have all sorts of little smiley faces and things in different places in this book. But here, I have a question for you, and I have a picture of a coffee cup. So you probably know where I'm going to go with this question. So on page 348 of that chapter, um, she talks about making a Swedish coffee. And I can't help but wonder, did she make you a Swedish coffee? And you have to tell us why I'm asking that question. Tell us about the Swedish coffee, unless you want me to. And then, did you drink a Swedish coffee? I just have to know.
Yes, yes, I did. She was a real coffee addict, and she had to have really good coffee. And for those who, yes, with an egg, that's right. You make it with an egg. You crack an egg, and it's basically kind of a perk coffee, but the egg takes away any bitterness. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing, I have to say. And I would always bring her things from IKEA because I made forays to the south and she didn't. So lingonberry jam and there was a certain kind of Swedish chocolate that she liked, and she was very well, you can imagine just from the amount that I've told you, she was very particular, which served her well in studying birds. She did not let any detail pass her by, and neither did it in her kitchen or in her vegetable garden. She was precise in everything she did.
Yeah, and she certainly seemed that way. And I have more questions about the preciseness of her bird records. But first, Carmen, who joins us on a pretty regular basis, says somewhere in the first quarter of the book, I realized that it was thanks to her letters that you could get so much detail,
Mhm.
especially to her mother. And there's a story somewhere in there about a visit that she made to her mother where there was a period where there weren't letters, and
Yeah.
and and I think it was because she was in person, but we'll get to that. But uh, it must have been fascinating to read them. Can you comment a little more on that?
Oh, I certainly can. So Louise wrote to her mother every Sunday. I said she's a woman of habit. She wrote every Sunday, and the letters were 6 to 8 typewritten single space pages, and she told her mother everything, and so I had detail for well, like, she was having somebody was coming for dinner and she had to save her sugar rations for weeks to get enough sugar to make a lemon pie for her guests. Well, you wouldn't, I mean, where would you get detail like that? The letters were golden. When she first left home, and went up to into Russia and up to Archangel. Russia and Sweden were always, real enemies. Um, and at that time, with the Russian Civil War going on, uh, they didn't necessarily want her to know, want anyone to know that she was from Sweden. She wrote in Swedish. In those first letters were in French and in English. She spoke 5 languages fluently: French, English, Danish, Swedish, and Russian. And so she would write in any of those languages. And her first letters when she came to Canada were in Swedish. And then she switched to English, thank goodness. She switched to English, saying that it was faster for her to write in English than in Swedish. Um, and a side note is that when she was very elderly, the last couple of years before she died, she reverted to Swedish and would only speak Swedish. She wouldn't speak English. Anyway, my husband's a French translator. I hired a Swedish and a Russian translator to translate those early letters. I made copies of all her letters. It's, thousands of pages. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess I'm nosy enough that I like reading other people's mail. But it was fascinating to see her day-to-day life. Now, her mother, and I think a question, arose. I think I saw one about this. So Len, her hired man, became her lover and they married. Um, well, her mother was quite upset about this. And so their correspondence lapsed a bit there. And there's a really interesting, very sharp exchange of words between them, where basically Louise says, "Look, you're just going to have to suck it up and accept him because I love him." So yeah,
And
but
he's
Len,
here, you're not.
yes, well, exactly. They married the day after Canada declared war on Germany in 1939. A week later, he signed up and went to and was posted in England. And so for 5 years he was gone. And that 5 years was her beginning and nurturing of her obsession with birds. And I think that solitude was absolutely essential for her development. There was nobody there to cook for, nobody there to, you know, think
Entertain.
about their needs as well as hers. And so she just devoted herself completely to the birds. And she'd already lost one husband to a war. She did eventually find out that Gleb had been and 500 other White Russian soldiers were marched north to Archangel and were shot on the tundra. So she did find out what happened to him. And so she'd lost one husband, and I'm sure it was on her mind that she needed to keep her mind occupied, so she wasn't going to worry too much about Len.
Yeah, what a story. And I have something that I want to read a little bit just from your book. But Kathleen Swee has a question. You had mentioned in kind of we could learn from the birds and their dealing with aggression. And
Mhm.
Kathleen is asking, what is the lesson she observed from birds for humans about dealing with aggression?
Okay, well, it wasn't woodpeckers. It was, oh my God, I'm having a little brain cramp. Um, Remember the woodpecker family with the big white splotch on the back of its tail, on its bum. You all know what bird this is. Anyway, she did a long study of them, and she was particularly interested in what happened when their territories bumped up against each other. How did they handle that? And what she found was, and in the book, yes, a flicker. Thank you very much, Sue. Ah, um, so she watched them, and in the book, I have illustrations of so their body language. First of all, they would face each other, and they would tilt their bills up, and they'd move them in a figure eight like that. And if that didn't work, they would open up their wings like this because on the inside they're very white, and so it would be this big sort of white bird. And if that didn't work, then the two birds would go zipping off into the forest. And they'd be zigzagging through the forest, not chasing each other, each of them independently, just going through the forest, working off their aggression physically. And so she felt that this was such a I was going to say humane, such a great way um, to to deal with so-called enemies, threatened incursion into your territory. Um, yes, it was really, really I love that part of the book, so I hope you're able to find it in the book.
Yeah, it's close to page 277-ish for those of you who want
Alicia,
to go
you
back
are
to the
remarkable.
book. So I think this crowd is used to me going, okay, on page such and such, you said. Um, it is interesting because birds they don't want to get hurt, and they don't want to
No,
compromise their flight ability or their ability to deal with things. They just want to scare off, so making themselves look big, or in the case of the flickers, finding different ways to deal with that. Now we have a question in here from Sue, um, who correctly identified the flicker. Um,
yes,
and
thank you, Sue.
so, with no heirs, what happened to her cabin? Who owns it now? Tell us?
Yes, well, um, so when she died, she bequeathed the cabin and the property to a Swedish friend, a scientist at the National Research Council in Ottawa. He used it as sort of a summer place for about at least 20 years, no more than that, 25 years. Uh, and then he sold it to a young woman. Um, and that's about the time that I started writing the book. I contacted the person who owned the cabin, and she said, so she and her partner had moved there. That was going to be their forever house. And then her partner left her. And so in the throes of great emotional difficulty. And she decided to sell the property. So we arranged that I would buy it. And this was back in, I don't know when it was, about 25, no, about 2015. So maybe 10, 11 years ago. And and I was on my way to Mexico, so I said, for sure, let me know how much you want down. We'll get this started now, and I'll finish it when I get back in the spring. And when I got back in the spring, she had sold it to someone else, um, a local family. Um, and as far as I know, they still own it, although it has been on the market pretty much steadily for the last 4 years. Um, there's been some talk, when I give talks in Canada, especially in Ontario, there's a lot of interest in people raising money to buy it. My intention in buying it was to create it as a writing retreat for nature writers. Um, but that didn't happen, and I don't know if it will ever go into public hands. There are some processes by which it can happen. There is a national and a provincial trust that I've been sick for the last 6 years, and so I there was no way that I could undertake that. So I was hoping that somebody else would. So it's still kind of in limbo as far as I know. The owners still have it, and they have made changes to the property that they put a road in, and before you always had to walk in. So the property has changed in ways that kind of compromise it a little bit. Although, a bit of tree planting and it'd be back to where it was. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating to read all of your stories and all of the things that you've discovered about her. And I did want to read this for those of you that have the book. It's in the chapter A Strong Wall Around Me, and I'm starting on page 152. But I really felt connected to her through your writing and your gathering of all of this. And boy, I wish I could have read some of her mail. That sounds pretty exciting. Um, but she says, and you tried, correct me if I'm wrong, you tried throughout the book to use her words as much as possible.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So plenty of material in here to read from that are her words. And I know in one, and I have lots of little bookmarks in here, but I'm not going to be able to find it quickly. You had mentioned that she had the gift of solitude. So when her second husband went off to war, that was, and you said he was gone, I think 5-ish years. That was her opportunity to have some solitude and do some things. How many of us would like to have that? Can I have
No
five
kidding.
years where I don't have to do anything but what I want to do?
Five
But
minutes. Yeah.
yeah, can I have 10 minutes? Yes. So she says in just the way that she writes is amazing. And I think you've just captured so much of it so well. And I will say that language, I know I have a friend who's from Greece, and when she's mad, she speaks in a foreign language. She's French Canadian or lives in Canada, speaks French and speaks English. But when she talks to babies, oh yeah, no, She's, and then as her mother was getting older, same thing. She spoke in the mother tongue as
Yeah.
opposed to English. So I can see how that happens. But here's my quick little, and I am keeping an eye on time. So here and there, the snow still lay in, I have no idea how to pronounce this, Shakavar shards
Chart.
darts, and sheets of ice hung down the cliffs. Ducks came flying over and settling with a splash in the water. We have never seen so many loons. Um, there were 7 all told. I began calling to one of them, and loons have like 3 different calls: the hey yoo-hoo, and the hey, I'm sexy over here, come join me, and then the warning call. But she was singing woo hoo 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 hoo, and the loon answered me back, and he kept answering me until Len got tired of hearing us. And I love that. And I'm going to guess that if Lynn wasn't in the canoe at the time, she probably would have kept talking to that bird all night long.
Yeah. Yeah.
So share with us a little bit. And I was looking for other questions and I don't see. If I missed a question in the chat, please raise your hand or give me a signal or put it back in. But while we wind down, it's amazing that there are all those records and all of her notes.
Yeah.
And we were chatting a little bit earlier. It feels like eBird isn't always as story oriented as the 3x5 cards that she wrote on with, behaviors and things. I mean, you can write little notes in there. What do you think Louisa, what do you think she would have thought about eBird and Merlin and, stuff like that?
Yeah. She was very she very much lived in the present. She adopted technologies. I think I expect that she would use it, as a research tool, as so many ornithologists are now. I mean, eBird gives us a way of knowing the breadth of where birds are. I mean, when we were on Pelee Island this spring, there were hardly any warblers coming across. Pelee Island's a pinch point between Ohio and Ontario, and so we get thousands of millions of birds coming across. But eBird told us that they were all stalled. The radar showed they were all stalled down in North in Nashville, around the Nashville, yeah, in Tennessee. Because the weather was so crappy up here in the spring. However, she would also her precise nature would make her upset that that Merlin is so often wrong. We often, my husband and I, we often bird up in the Sierra Gorda, which is a mountain range to the east of where we live in Mexico. We live right in the middle in the mountains, and the Sierra Gorda biosphere is astonishing. There's something like 326 species there. So you see lots of birds, and you see, I mean, new to us birds, and Merlin will either say that bird can't be there, or please send us a photograph because that's too rare to be credible. Uh, but what Merlin doesn't take into account is the fact that binoculars are not common in Mexico. The guides that would take us into the forest, into the pine forest or the jungle, they didn't have binoculars. They identified everything by sight. And so it's gross markings that become important at that point. And so Merlin makes lots and lots of mistakes. And I think I told you before we joined everyone that in Mexico there are roosters all around us, and so we hear roosters calling in the morning, along with all the other lovely birds. And Merlin identifies the roosters as jungle fowl, which of course were the ancestors of our domesticated chickens.
Wishful thinking. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're coming up on the end to the top of the hour, so we have to end because I don't know about you, but it's close to my bedtime. So lots of kudos about the great book and the writing. Um, Vanna writes, where are all of her, I'm thinking archives. And
Yes.
then were you a birder before you met Louise? So two
Yes.
questions, two quick
Okay,
questions.
yes, and so I've been birding since I was 7 years old. My uncle, I have his bird book. He taught me the birds. He introduced me to the bird world. In the book, I thread a little bit of my experience into the story, just slightly, so that the reader can kind of get to know who's writing this book. Louise and I never birded together. What was the first part of that question? I answered the second part first.
So her archives.
Oh yes, her archives are
I'm
in
pretty sure that's what was being asked, that or
yeah,
where
her
her archives.
archives are in Ottawa, in National Archives Canada, and anybody can go and read her letters and look at her scrapbook. She was a scrapbooker, so she has, all these media clippings of her during the Quint time and after. The book was published in Sweden and in the United States. Yeah. So it's fascinating reading, honestly. And all her drawings are there as well. She was hopeless with a camera, but she could draw, and her drawings are really she has a drawing of her hand, like one of her first drawings when she was teaching herself to draw. She drew her hand and it had a cigarette in it, and that's how I knew she smoked.
Well, thank you so much, Marilyn, for joining us this evening. And I did have a bunch of other questions, but for those of you who have not had the opportunity to read the book, pay attention to the fact that Louise was a woman and that she had a little bit of a hard time getting into the ornithological world. And I will share with you that even though there's a president of what's now, it was the American Ornithological Union, now it's the American Ornithological Society, but it, it's still a struggle for many women in this field. So if you have an opportunity to look at the book, think about the things, the stories that you were able to tell us about her. Just give that a thought as you're reading it, and how can we
Well,
kind of change that narrative?
and I would like to just make one other comment too. If you go to my website, MerilynSimonds.com, you just have to spell it correctly. Um, if if you there is a short documentary film there made of her by my granddaughter, who's a filmmaker, and my son took my interview tapes from 1989 and cleaned them up, so you can actually hear Louise's voice there too, which is quite wonderful.
Nice. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Appreciate your joining us for another Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. And we will hopefully see you in August on the second Thursday of the month. Thank you, Marilyn. Have a great
Oh,
evening.
thank you, Alicia, and thank all of you for your good questions and for coming. Thank you.